Welcome to the Peer Perspective Podcast, where we dive into real stories of recovery, resilience, and hope. I'm your host, Kyle Van Blaricum, and today we have an incredible journey to share with you. But before we begin, if you know anyone who might be inspired by today's message, please take a moment to share the podcast with them. Your support helps us reach more people who need to hear these powerful stories. Let's get started. So, Tim, again, I just want to say thank you. I'm so grateful that you're going to take the time to chat with me this morning. You know, I am excited to hear you have a very unique perspective on all of this because you're the executive director of the National Association of Peer Supporters. So I'm just really excited to learn from you today. And uh, if you're comfortable sharing a little bit about your background and kind of what brought you into the peer support world.
Of course. Well, I wanted to start just by saying I appreciate the invitation. I'm so excited to be speaking with you today. And like I said during our prep session, anytime a Wisconsinite asks for anything, I'm always happy to say yes. Um, I am the executive director right now of the National Association of Peer Supporters. I'm relatively new to this role, actually. I've only been in it for about 6 months. But I've been in peer support for almost 10 years, or at about 9 years right now. And I originally got into peer support back in 2016. And I always tell this story. I've told it many, many times because I think it's important to sort of push back on some of the reasons that people get into peer support. There's sort of this idea that it has to be this like altruistic part of my recovery. I have to give back, service above self. And I got into peer support because I needed to make more money to pay rent. Um, so I was working for a fast casual dining chain and I was doing DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. And there was a person in my DBT class who was a peer supporter, and her organization was sponsoring a peer certification class. And so she brought the flyer in and said, "This is what I do. This is my job. My organization's sponsoring this class. If you guys are interested, here's the information." And so I asked her questions about it. I had no idea that this even was a profession, a thing that you could do. And so I learned from her sort of what it was. I learned and saw, they were going to host this class and then they were going to hire some people directly out of it. The starting wage was, I think it was 14 or $15 an hour, which at the time I was making, I think 10. So I was like, okay, that's like a 50% increase to my pay. And so that's how I got started in peer support. It really was like, I saw it as an opportunity to make the money I needed to pay my bills. And also, I was someone who was raised really believing like you could go to college, you have a professional career, you work your way up the career ladder to become an executive. And that was the expectation. And then when I was experiencing mental health and substance use challenges, I had to drop out of college. And so I was, like I said, working in food services, which there's nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't the path that I had envisioned for myself or that my family and, you know, let me know was the expectation. And so I saw this as an opportunity to go work in a professional space as like my colleague who was in DBT with me was working for a large, social service organization in downtown Milwaukee. She had an office and, went in and did notes in her cubicle. And I was like, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And this is my pathway to that. And so to me, it was like, it really was a professional opportunity and a way to sort of build a career and pay my bills.
It's awesome. I know from my experience, I didn't even know that there was such a thing as peer support until pretty recently, about a year ago. So, um, you know, it's fascinating. And I think you said you've been doing it for about 10 years. And where are you originally from, Tim?
I'm originally from Milwaukee.
Okay.
So I have to clarify since you're from Wisconsin too, but for those who are from Wisconsin, I'm from the suburbs of Milwaukee. So anybody who's in Milwaukee, they're like, you're not from there, you're from Brookfield. For the rest of the state and the rest of the country, I'm from Milwaukee. But I
Okay.
have to put that disclaimer out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, you kind of covered it, how you got into peer support. What does peer support really mean to you?
It to me is so much more than a training, a certification, a job, a billable service. That to me is the least important part, which I know is not what people are used to hearing. But to me, peer support is about just human connections. Like it really is just two people sitting in their humanity together, seeing each other as full human beings and really witnessing each other. And I know that's very like esoteric language. Like, what does it actually mean? But
Mhm.
what I mean is that, like, if I'm sitting with you, I'm seeing everything that you are. Like, I'm seeing you and witnessing you as a person and your experiences and what you're telling me and who you are. And I'm not making any sort of judgments. I'm not telling you that anything's wrong or that anything needs to be fixed or that you need to make any changes or that you're sick or that you have a disease or that you need to be in recovery or you need to have housing. True peer support, when done well, whether it's at work or just in our day-to-day lives, is about just witnessing the other person and sitting with them. So they're telling me whatever it is they're telling me, and I'm just hearing it. I'm receiving it. I'm taking it in, and there's power. And to me, there's excitement in that. And that's really, to me, what peer support is. It's just about us witnessing each other as full human beings.
Thank you for that. You had mentioned that you have had some lived experience with mental health and substance use. Can you talk a little bit about that, or are you comfortable sharing?
Of course, yeah. I always happy to talk about it. So I started experiencing mental health challenges when I was like in my teens is when I was really struggling, and a lot of it was rooted in being gay and being raised in an environment where that wasn't acceptable. I'm from a upper middle class white conservative Christian family, and that was not an acceptable path in life. And then it was also very intertwined with being adopted. So I'm adopted from Guatemala. My siblings are also adopted, and so our parents are white, and we don't look like them. They did a great job raising us and always being very, it was never a secret that we were adopted. They always made sure that we knew what that meant and what that was, and that we were still family. And they did a great job with all those pieces. But there's still a lot of distress and hard experiences that come with that. And so it was just kind of multiplicative feelings of not knowing who I was, not having a place in the world. And it led to, feelings of deep distress. I engaged in self-harm, a lot of cutting for many years. And then when the cutting stopped, it basically just got replaced by with drinking and using drugs. And that went on until I was about 22, 20. No, it would have been, God, 21, I think is when I was really sort of doing okay again. 21, 22. And so I did all sorts of treatment. I did inpatient, I did outpatient, intensive outpatient, partial hospitalization, group therapy, individual therapy, DBT, 12 steps, smart recovery. I've done it all, as many of us have. Um, but what I've really learned, and as I've grown over time and had the opportunity to reflect on my experiences, that I don't really look at them as like I had depression or I have this brain disease of like a substance use disorder, moderate. What I really see it as is my response to having to navigate a world that isn't designed for me. I think that how I was responding and how I was feeling and what I was doing are very reasonable responses to being in a world that there's no space for me to talk about being adopted and the struggles with that and being in a family and a city, a town where I grew up is very conservative, where there really isn't any space for queerness. And I was responding to being mistreated by the world that we live in and not being in supportive environments. And so to me, really when things got better is when I found those communities. I built a community of queer friends, and then I stopped feeling so horrible about myself, and I was able to sort of re-engage with the world. And I, went to 12 step. I had a very negative experience with 12 step programming. I've talked about that quite a bit. I liked smart recovery quite a bit better for me. Um, and going through smart, but then also building community, and then having my job and getting my apartment and my life. I had all of my basic needs that I wanted that to me were important and that I viewed as being like, this is what makes you a person. My understanding of that has changed since then, but those were the things that I wanted. And then once I had them and I had the support that I needed to build a life that I wanted to be present for, I no longer felt the need to drink until I blacked out, to get out of the life I didn't want to be in. And so it was just so much more than like go do treatment and stop drinking. It was really like once your material conditions have changed and you're in supportive environments, I no longer felt the need to respond the way that I was responding. And I don't now. So to me, it's not really mental health or substance use experiences. I don't call it that. I don't really use recovery language at all. I'm using that just because that's an easier context for people to understand. But to me, it was just like I experienced a significant period of distress, and now I don't. It's over, and I grew out of it. And I don't, not to ramble on and on, but I also don't choose to anchor that. That's not an anchor point in my life. So I don't think of my life as like pre-drinking, post-drinking, or like pre-mental health challenges, post-mental health challenges. Those experiences are not a defining characteristic of me. I don't use them as part of my identity. I don't think of myself as like I'm a person in recovery, a person who's experienced mental health challenges. They're just one of many aspects of myself that I don't give any more priority to above other things. There are pieces of me that are significantly more important when I think of who I am than the fact that I used to call myself like that. I don't choose to place a lot of value on that for myself.
I love that. I think, even for myself, so much of my identity at one point was, I'm in recovery from all these things, and there's so much more to us as human beings than that. So I really, yeah, I appreciate that. So can you talk a little bit about the National Association and what it does, where it's at? Yeah, if you can kind of give us a little bit of an overview.
Of course, I'd be happy to. So the National Association of Peer Supporters has been around for 20 years, actually 20 years this year. It was founded in 2004 in Michigan, is where our 501(c)(3) status was initially filed. We are officially based out of Washington, D.C. right now, but we're a totally virtual organization. We're fully remote, so we have staff all over the country. Right now, we have staff in Vermont, Virginia, and then I am, like I said, originally from Wisconsin, but I just moved to Louisiana, to New Orleans 3 days ago. So we have folks all over the country.
That's changed since I last talked to you because you were in Mo or back to Milwaukee. So you just made another
Mhm.
move. Okay.
Yes, this time for good. So we're staying in
Okay.
New Orleans for a while. So we are fully remote, and we've, like I said, been around for 20 years. And really, it was created originally to serve as sort of the matching professional association to, the National Association of Community Health Workers or the National Association of Social Workers or addiction professionals. It really was meant to be that organization. And over the past 20 years, it's also served as a space for the workforce to gather, to network, to meet each other, and really to act as one of the very, very, very few organizations that is fully peer-led, peer-run, showing up in the national space, advocating specifically just for the peer workforce, not and there's nothing wrong with doing it in hand with other things, but a lot of the other organizations do it as like part of a broader umbrella of things that they work on. Whereas for NAPS, it's just peer support. We don't focus on, clinicians or licensure or CHWs, and those are all great things. But we're one of, a handful of national organizations that are able to say that. And so over time, we have been able to build up the work that we do to produce a variety of national documents that we still refer to, the national practice guidelines for peer specialists and supervisors. Something that I always like to share about that many people have probably heard before, is that document was actually created in collaboration with about 1,000 peer workers from across the country. What we did was create a draft document and then send it out to all of our members for review and approval and notes. And we held a vote on it about whether or not people wanted this to be the document that we published. And I believe it was 98% of folks voted, yes, we approve this document. We like it. It's what we want to really be representative of the peer workforce. And so when you compare that to the way other documents are produced by other organizations, federal agencies, that level of transparency, peer input, peer value, peer collaboration is really lacking. And so, as an organization, NAPS is really able to do things differently to elevate the peer voice and to really bring it to the table at the federal level in terms of policy advancement, working with the federal government, in terms of engaging in SAMHSA-led work, but also just creating leadership and advancement, educational opportunities for the workforce at large. I do kind of have to note that we are a pay to play organization. It is a dues based membership organization. So a lot of the things that we do in order to participate, you do need to be a dues paying member. But again, comparatively to other organizations, our membership is extremely more affordable than a lot of the other ones.
You kind of started to talk about it, but can you speak on a little bit of the policy work that you guys are either working on or have kind of accomplished?
Of course. So we are lucky enough to be part of a larger group, which is where we work on most of our policy, and that is the mental health liaison group. And so through that group, we coordinate our efforts with other larger national organizations, such as the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, MHA National, Mental Health America, and we work together to sort of make sure that our policy priorities are in alignment, that we agree, in terms of the language we're suggesting for Congress. And so through that group, we have been able to support several bills, including the Peer Support Act, the Peers in Medicare Act. We've worked on a bill around peers in mobile crisis outreach teams, as well as excuse me, supporting. There was earlier this year, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services released an updated frequently asked questions document and updated their language around who's able to supervise peers for the first time, saying peers are able to supervise other peers. And we were able to provide suggestions about what that language should look like and contribute to the development of the advocacy around that document. And then we've also played a very large role in the advocacy around the development of a standard occupational classification for peer specialists through the Department of Labor. And so those are some of the federal level policies that we've worked on. We also have a policy committee for members. We actually just met yesterday. It's a bi-monthly committee where we work with the members to develop. We're in the process of developing a policy platform that we'll be able to have up on our website so people can get a clear picture of where we stand on different pieces. And so through that, we're looking at potentially crafting example policy or legislation that states could adapt or adopt as it pertains to peer support around some certification pieces, employment pieces. And we're also very interested in exploring developing sort of legislator toolkits, in terms of if you're going to be crafting policy around peer support, here are relevant peer-oriented, peer-developed documents that you should be looking at, referencing here's the knowledge you need to be able to do that effectively, so that we can again have those peer-led, peer-oriented resources in the hands of legislators that are, correct resources instead of some of the other documents that they lean on that have led to legislation that maybe isn't quite as in alignment with peer support as we'd like it to be. So we have our hands on quite a bit of policy that's continuing, and our members get to play an important role in helping us shape what our policy positions are as well.
Sounds like you guys are doing a lot of amazing work out there. It's exciting to hear about. Um, why, so you kind of started to talk a little bit about your members are able to play a role in all of that. Are there any other advantages or that people would have by being a member of NAPS?
Of course. So that policy committee is one of several committees actually that members can be a part of. So we have a policy committee, a workforce development committee, an event planning committee, and then in 2025 we'll be rolling out a crisis committee and a youth and young adult peer supporters committee, so that we can really have the members helping us craft what we want our messaging to be, where we focus, what work they want to see done, and then also help us to do those things. So something that we're really interested in, that I have a personal investment in, and our organization does, is that these committees are not just spaces where people come and talk to each other and then the NAPS staff goes away and does the work, but that these committees are really an opportunity for us to collaborate so that the folks who are on the committee, the members who are able to participate, can have their name on a document that NAPS publishes or can come to a policy committee, a policy event, with us and actually go and testify or help us craft a policy position or go speak to a legislator, or that, in the crisis space, they're able to help us develop a position paper about, what should crisis peer support actually look like. So we really want them to serve as spaces where people are able to network, learn from each other, hear what we're doing, but also do something, build the skills to speak on some of these on some of these topics, put their name on a published document, build that resume, build that skill development that is so important to longevity in peer careers, but that you don't really get in a lot of spaces, and that you're, not really going to get if you're, quote unquote, just in direct service work. So those committee spaces are an area that we really like to talk about. We also, of course, have a backlog of trainings that folks can take for continuing education credits. And then starting in 2025 as well, we are rolling out an ECHO, a peer support ECHO. ECHO stands for an extension for community healthcare outcomes. And it is a fully vetted and researched model out of the University of Albuquerque in New Mexico, so that peers, our members, will be able to come together and learn from each other. Their motto is "All teach, all learn," which we love. That's right in line with peer values. And so what it does is that it'll give us the opportunity to look at real world examples, have, a person, a member present a real world example of a struggle they're having in providing peer support services. And then the group sort of crowdsources answers, this, have you tried this? Have you tried that? What about this? What about that? And it gives us the opportunity to develop skills and education from each other, by each other. And so we're hoping to host that twice monthly starting in January. And again, that will be open only to members, as a space to learn and grow together within a specific model. We're also in the process of putting together some networking opportunities starting next year on a bi-monthly basis, where members will have the opportunity to meet with leaders in the field, national leaders or historical leaders, elders. This will be a chance for them to pick their brains, get to meet them. Who are these sort of figures in the peer movement that maybe you've heard about, or you've seen, or you've read their work, you've gone to a training. This is your chance to meet them, and to get to know them and bridge that gap. The last piece, of course, to talk about is our conference. If you're a member, you get discounted conference registration. If you're a member, you have the opportunity to apply for scholarships. This year, we were able to offer several Fulbright scholarships that covered registration, lodging, flights. We are flying people in this year from all across the country, from Alaska, from North Dakota, from Guam. And so we are really working hard to bring in the folks who might otherwise not be able to get to some of these events, and who are really from disparate parts of the country that we feel are historically underserved and overlooked. And so if you're a member and you're living in some of these more remote or further away parts of the country, you would have the opportunity to apply for a scholarship and potentially have all of your expenses paid for, to be able to attend. And then in addition to that, you just have access to us. Something that I am very vested in as an executive director is making sure that I'm not in an ivory tower. I hate when people are coming to the conference and that's the only time they see me. They don't know who I am. And then all of a sudden I'm speaking at the lectern and they're like, who is that? So if you're a member, you are welcome to schedule a meeting with me at any time to talk about anything, whether it's just to chat and have coffee and get to know each other, or you're like, I want help with this specific thing that is happening at work, or I want to be connected to this project. Members are welcome to schedule time with me at any time for any reason, as long as it fits in my calendar, so that they get to know who I am and that we get to build that relationship between member and executive director. So there's quite a few reasons to be a member. I feel like we offer a pretty robust plethora, a suite of member benefits.
Yeah, that's awesome stuff. And the conference is going to be held in Chicago, or did I get that
Chicago.
wrong?
Mhm.
Okay, and that's
Nope,
coming
that's
up.
correct.
Okay.
Very, very soon. Yes. I was just saying yesterday that I'm compartmentalizing it into like one space in my brain. Yes, our conference is the week after next, in Chicago. Very, very excited for it this year. Our theme is reclaiming our power, really leaning into the idea that peer supporters have all the power and skills and knowledge that we need to do things ourselves. Systems are great to work with when we want to work with them, but we don't need them to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. And when it comes to peer support, we need to be leading the way, not giving that power away to systems so that they can lead the way and then we follow. So we're really excited to be offering breakout sessions that are all rooted in truly alternative peer-oriented models and practices. We have excellent keynote speakers this year. We have an amazing mental health advocate, Lorenzo Lewis, who's very well known for his work in Black communities, educating and training salon and barbershop workers around mental health so that they Black communities who are in those spaces don't have to leave their community or go into systems to receive support. They can go to a community hub that already exists, that they're already going to, and talk to the person that they would already talk to, which is really, I mean, that's if that's not peer support, what is? So we're really excited to have him. And then we also have Azime Nimahai, who is an incredible harm reductionist out of Boston, working with drug users unions, syringe exchange programs, a person who uses drugs to talk about really why it's important to support harm reduction. What even is harm reduction? In the context of where we are now, everybody says they do harm reduction, and so we'll have a real, radical abolitionist harm reductionist here to talk to us about, how do we support people who use drugs? How does that relevant to peer support? And then sort of the undertone of all of this is sort of reclaiming the political power that comes with all of this. That peer support is a social justice movement. That's where its history is. That's where its roots are. And we can't forget that just because now we're mostly looked at as a workforce. And so we'll be talking a lot about sort of how do you repoliticize some of this and why is it important to understand political systems and how do we stay engaged with all those things, even though now most people see us as like a certified professional workforce. We don't want to leave that history behind. So it'll be a really exciting conference. I cannot wait. Like I literally just moved to New Orleans 2 days ago, but then we're going back to the Midwest. So I'm excited. I love Chicago, and I'm hoping that we'll have a really great turnout.
Yeah, I was actually supposed to go, but I had a conflict. So me and my coworker were going to come down to Chicago. So I'm a little bummed out about that. And it's not commonly held in the Midwest, if I understand. It's usually, or this is like the first time in a while that it's been there.
Yes, this was a huge push on my part and the part of some of our board. We have gone sort of around the outside of the country. We were in San Diego, and then we were in Houston, and then we were in Virginia Beach, sort of going in a big U. And then the one that we canceled that was supposed to happen during pandemic was in Baton Rouge. And we've seen that with a lot of other conferences, right? They're often on the East or West Coast. And there isn't a ton of accessibility in the interior of the country. And as someone who's from that part of the country, from the Midwest, I just know that there's so much exceptional peer support that's happening in the Great Lakes region, in the Midwestern region, that gets overlooked and that really doesn't get elevated to the degree that it should. And so we wanted to use this as an opportunity to highlight that there is amazing work happening in Illinois, in Michigan, in Minnesota, in Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, the Dakotas. There's so much going on that we just don't get to hear about. And so we were hoping, and as we will see, we have some great breakout proposals. Bringing the conference to this part of the country allowed a lot of those folks to shine, and allowed increased attendance from that part of the country. So I'm really excited to be able to bring it there, and hopefully we'll be able to see that continue.
So shout out to the Midwest. Woo, woo.
Yes, always.
Awesome stuff. So Tim, can you talk a little bit about issues facing peer support? And I know that there's challenges. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke with someone who was really struggling to get into the workforce because the very lived experience that, brings value, prevented him from working with a lot of organizations. So can you maybe speak a little bit about that? And then yeah, anything else you see as being a challenge for people?
Yeah, I think there's a lot, and I think uh, from my lens, I really see the professionalization of the workforce being one of the major barriers, being one of the major sort of struggles that we're seeing really metastasize right now. Um, for a long time, people talked about peer support, as I mentioned earlier, as a part of a movement, as a social justice movement, as a way to reclaim power from systems. And over time, we've seen it really transform into a systems approved, systems oriented, billable service, right? And the history of where we came from is really diluted. I always share the example, going back to when you asked, like, how did I get into peer support? I didn't know that there was a movement history or that it was part of a larger picture until maybe a year after I actually started working. I only knew it through the context of this is a state approved certification that will let me work professionally. And so when folks are entering the workforce through those methods of like the state-backed certification and thinking like this is what peer support is, we lose the greater context of what it is we're supposed to be doing, and what it is that our elders wanted and that the history really pointed towards and that people are experiencing. And so the more that we see this work becoming professionalized and standardized and based on systems oriented and approved, methods of like, are you certified or not? Are you billing or not? Are you using this language or not? Are you getting people sober? Are you getting them into recovery? Are you getting them to take your meds? None of those things are relevant, peer oriented outcomes. And so when we talk about barriers to the continued growth and development, it's our desire and willingness to integrate and assimilate into systems. Like that to me is the biggest problem. That we keep giving our power up to these systems. We keep saying, you state decide for us what peer support is. You federal government control the purse strings. You publish the documents, when it really should be the opposite. We should be in control of those things and saying, here is the document that was approved by, 1,000 peers across the country. This is the document that we want to use. Now you should be using this one, not we're going to follow your lead. And that professionalization compounds other problems like the one you were talking about. We were just talking about this in the policy committee yesterday, that folks who have anything on their background have a hard time finding jobs, even though oftentimes having something on your background is relevant to the position or is an outcome of having mental health or substance use challenges. I have a DUI on my background and had to navigate through that experience with my employer because I was working for an organization where we were allowed to drive people. And so we had to talk through like, what does that mean? Are they able to insure me as an organization, or am I not allowed to drive people? But it was relevant to the work that I was doing because we were working with other people who had experienced DUIs, and we're trying to navigate that system and had other substance use related challenges. And so the more that we go into like this professionalization route, the more those traditional historic barriers that the movement was created to resist and change get in our way, and the more that we contribute to the development of those problems. I've said for a couple of years, the call is coming from inside the house. There's sort of this all this talk about like, I'm so worried of co-optation. I'm so nervous that we're going to get co-opted, but we are co-opting ourselves, and we already have been for many, many years. And so I think there needs to be a greater reckoning with that of sort of what are we doing? How are we contributing to this problem that we're claiming is like systems imposing on us, but that we've willingly been a part of? And then for me, what I also see as one of the major barriers are the certifications themselves. So I've talked about this quite a bit. And I always give the disclaimer, like I'm not saying that we should get rid of all the certifications, that they're all terrible and they have no value. What I am saying is that we've put all our eggs in one basket. With the certifications, they're viewed now as sort of the only route to be taken seriously as a peer specialist is to go get certified, because that certification theoretically is supposed to prove that you have a certain set of skills or that you're bound by a code of ethics or that you're protecting the public at large. But what we've seen is that those trainings are really focused on Medicaid billable peer support. That's sort of what they're designed to teach. That's what they teach too, because you need the certification to bill Medicaid, and you can bill Medicaid in I think all but one or two states. And so most of the states created their training and certification so that they could have Medicaid billable programs. But the most peer-oriented programs, like Peer on Respites, recovery community organizations, Peer on Warm Lines, drop-in centers, clubhouses, are not billing Medicaid. And so when they go through a training that teaches you how to do Medicaid billable peer support, and then you go to work in a peer respite where you're doing, radically different peer support, the training actually gets in your way and the certification actually slows you down. What I hear from folks around the country who run those sorts of programs is that when they hire people who've been certified by the state, they have to spend extra time unlearning all the things that they learned in the training because it's not actually helpful. They have to reteach them all these peer-oriented skills. So instead of assuming that the certifications are an appropriate bar that everybody needs to pass in order to be in this field, what we need to do is look at them as one option. If you want to go do Medicaid available peer support, go through that training, get certified because that's what you need to do. If you want to work in a respite or Moreline or anywhere else that is doing more peer-oriented work, there has to be another way to measure the skills that you need to be in that space without the certification. Um, and so there just needs to be multiple branches to workforce access, as well as just more robust funding streams. Um, and I think we've, like I said, just viewed these certifications as like this is what is going to put us on par with everyone else. And I think sort of the last thing that I would speak to is that we've really seen a coalescing around the idea that we need to be on par with everybody. In order to be taken seriously, we have to have a national certification because that's what everyone else does, or we have to do things a certain way because that's what the other professions do. We have to use this language because otherwise the clinicians don't take us seriously, or we have to be able to dress a certain way because otherwise the doctors don't look at me right. But I don't care about that stuff. I'm sitting in this meeting with you as the executive director of a national nonprofit. I'm wearing a Jurassic Park t-shirt, my hair's green. I am not interested in those things, and I never have been. Anyone who's worked with me knows that. Those things are not what make us peers. We are meant to be resisting those things and offering an alternative. So instead of saying, like, how do we build a career ladder that maps onto how social workers have their career ladder, like multiple tiered licenses? Can we do like a base peer and then peer one and then peer two and then peer supervisor? All we're doing is recreating existing systems. We're recreating the harmful systems that we are meant to be opposing and resisting. So, what I would love to see us doing instead is looking at alternatives. What could we do instead of creating a hierarchical career ladder? What could we do instead of saying, in order to be taken seriously, you have to dress a certain way or use specific language? Instead, could we be offering alternatives? And there are some organizations that are doing that, but not many. And so I really see the barrier sort of all of them fit under one umbrella, which is the workforce's interest and desire to integrate and assimilate into the existing systems instead of resisting that assimilation and focusing on how can we be different.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Tim. I think this is a good segue to kind of ask your thoughts on what you think the future of peer support holds.
I'm hoping to see it continue to expand and just become a broader and broader umbrella. Right now, we've been talking internally at NAPS about how the words peer support, when you hear them in the field or when you go to meetings, there's a instant association with mental health and substance use. That if you're doing peer support, people assume it's mental health or substance use. And that we have been sort of talking about, like, is that language lost? If I'm talking about providing peer-to-peer support, that's rooted in my experience of being adopted. If I say I'm doing peer support with this person, a third party is going to think we're talking about mental health and substance use challenges when that may not be the case. And so we've been talking a lot about what does the language look like to evolve, to be broader, to talk about disability to disability or chronic illness to chronic illness or indigeneity to indigeneity that may not be rooted in mental health challenges or substance use challenges, but are still peer-to-peer support. Um, we've really felt like the container of peer support sort of shrinking in on us, of peer support now can only be mental health or substance use because that's how systems view it, because that's how we know that language to be. And so how do we push the walls of that box back open? That's what we'd really like to see in the future of, like, we've talked a lot internally about like grief and death work, dualship, all of these experiences that are rooted in community and shared experiences, but again, may have nothing to do with mental health or substance use. And so how do we support the growth and development of those things while also supporting and helping the resistance of assimilation? So how do we say, we want peer support to expand to cover adoption to adoption, adoptee to adoptee, without it getting sucked into the same box that we're in now of sort of the research around peer support is focused on clinical outcomes. And so if we're going to say we want to elevate like adoptee to adoptee peer support, how do we do that in a way that doesn't set it up to be then researched on through a clinical lens so that it becomes viewed through, a systems oriented lens, and then it gets taken over by the systems the same way that peer support has in mental health and substance use. And so what we're really working hard to do, and that we've been having conversations with people a lot, is what can we offer instead? So if instead of this document that's come from a non-peer run, peer-led organization, can we build a library of resources that are from peer run, peer-led organizations? So when we see researchers trying to put things together, or organizations building programming, or employers wanting to hire people, or peers looking for what's the model, we can say, use this, not that. Use this one that was approved by 1,000 peers, not that one that had one peer at the table. Use this one that was led by harm reductionists, and not this one that was led by, two harm reductionists at the table of clinicians. Um, and like I talked about earlier with the legislators, here's an educational policy packet of peer-oriented documents. So we're really trying to look at how do we sort of uh, reclaim the power from the systems to the peers to say, like, we can do this. And something that NAPS is very interested in moving forward is documenting and capturing and archiving a lot of historical records. A lot of the movement elders have done exceptional work, but we want to capture like we've talked a lot about, should we do like a podcast series where we're interviewing the elders for posterity, or capturing their work in one place so that people can access it coming into the movement, coming into the workforce. Do we have that knowledge, and can we reorient ourselves to the movement? I've talked about this for many years, and I always use the state specific example. But once certifications came in and that sort of professional development was created, a lot of the grassroots peer movements sort of fell by the wayside, sort of collapsed and went away a little bit. And what we're really interested in is sort of bringing them back, not creating it. It's already been created. It's a movement. It's still out there. It's just a little more disparate than it was previously. And so what we'd like to do is really revitalize the movement side of peerness. And there are many other folks doing exceptional workforce development. And so we've talked a lot about where's the gap. And we really view the gap as that movement space, that movement oriented space, that movement development space, community building, political organizing, legislative advocacy. Does the movement know how to do those things, and do they have the space to come to work on those things? And we don't really feel like they do. And so we'd like to build those spaces so that if they're going to go into this workforce or be in workforce oriented spaces, they also have a movement oriented space that they can come back to, or commune in, or learn from, so that they're not going into the workforce sort of unequipped in terms of knowledge and history and movement expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really important even to incorporate in some of the trainings, is kind of the history of peer support. I don't remember, actually, I don't remember learning about that at all. And I know that I had an interview a couple weeks ago, and they were sharing a little bit about the history of peer support and its origin, back in the what, 70s or something. Is that so it's been around for
Well, you
quite
could
a.
trace it. A lot of people will tell you, you could trace it all the way back to the 1800s in France,
Okay,
is really where you'll
okay.
see the
So
first example.
sure. So it's been around a while, right?
Quite some
Um,
time. Yep.
but you've given me a lot to think about, even in the way that I'm showing up in my own, practice, as far as, getting away. It's so easy when you work with systems to kind of get hijacked from, you know, peer support, right? And we start doing other things, and we start, yeah, so I appreciate that. You've really given me a lot to kind of consider here. I do want
Yeah.
to give you,
And I always like,
yeah,
sorry, I always like to say when I talk about this stuff that, people will often tell me, like, that's an ideal. That sounds not possible with today's
right.
funding. But the reason that I talk about it like this is because I know that you can do it. In my first peer position, after I took the training, I got hired right out of that certification training, and I went to work for the organization that my friend worked at. And it was the best, I think, introduction to peer support I could have had. The expectation was you were out of the office for 34 to 36 hours a week. They wanted us in the community with the people we were providing services to. And if you were going to be in the office, it was for like a staff meeting or to do notes. Like that was it. They didn't really want you hanging around the office. And so basically the constraints of the program were you can do anything with the people you're working with as long as it's in Milwaukee County and it's legal. So we would go get lunch together so they could practice social skills. We would walk by Lake Michigan so that we could just talk and they could get out of the house. I have shared this example many times, but when I would first meet with people, we would go antiquing and walk around the antique stores so that we could just get to know each other and like laugh at silly, couches. If they were telling me like I need housing, then we would go do that. But if they were really just coming for peer support, we would not even talk about mental health or substance use challenges for the most part because they had other things going on in their life. And so I learned to do peer support that way because the program was set up that way. And so I know that peer support can be done that way and funded and billed for because I've done it. I know that it's more than ideal. I know that it's happening right now. I think it just takes some creativity and a willingness to stay true to our values and to say no to different things. We don't have to take every funding opportunity that comes our way. We don't have to be billing Medicaid if we don't want to be. We have the ability to sort of shape what comes next for peer support. And I actually think a lot of it needs to be rooted in us saying no to things instead of saying yes to everything that comes our way.
Well, Tim, I feel like I've learned so much just in this short period of time that we've been talking. I want to give you kind of the last opportunity to share anything else that you may have or yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just really appreciate this opportunity. I think having the chance to speak, peer to peer is really exciting. And I know I just spent 20 minutes being like, here's all the danger things that are happening in peer support. But I know that I am always hopeful about peer support. I would not care so deeply about, the issues facing us if I didn't believe we could overcome them. And I really do believe that peer support is just so exciting to me, and that I know that there are ways for us to continue to grow it, to stay true to our values, our history, our elders. And I know that we can do things differently. There are people doing it all the time, and that it's possible to have a career in peer support. When we were talking earlier about how did I get into it and all those things, like I always share any chance I get that I have no college degree. I have my high school diploma and I let my certification expire. So I have a high school diploma and I used to have a peer certification. And through community building and work and luck, I was able to build a 10-year career in peer support. So it is possible, for folks who feel like I don't know if I can do this or not. I would encourage you to connect with me, to connect with NAPS. We, like I said earlier, are very invested in supporting the growth and development of folks in the movement, in the workforce, to build skills, to get connected, to network. And we would love for you to be a part of our organization. So I'm hoping that a lot of you will reach out and connect with us. And I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.